Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started here in just a minute. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes to hop on in. This meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want to show up on screen, please feel free to turn off your cameras. Um, but yeah, we're so glad to have you here, and we will get started here in just a moment. If you would like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, feel free to open the chat and just let us know your name, where you're calling in from today, and one thing that you would like the team to know about you. Would love to hear how your weekend was as well. All right. Oh, and I see Amanda there. Excellent. All right. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. It's so good to have all of you here. I think we can go ahead and just jump on in. For those of you who are just joining us now, we're introducing ourselves in the chat right now. If you just want to let us know your name, where you're calling in from, and one thing you want us to know about you. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, my name is Monique. I am the Advocacy and Executive Manager here at Solve. And we have a few members of our team here with us today. So, let me just kind of introduce you to them briefly. You are probably familiar with our president and CEO, Emily Taylor. She has been here at Soul for a long time and is amazing. So she has been doing a lot of the behind the scenes work, meeting with legislators, helping drive programmatic decisions, and always pushing forward advocacy efforts each year. So very grateful to have her here. I'm here. Hello. We also have Amanda Martin, who's our engagement manager. So she handles a lot of the community outreach and keeping everyone connected and helps to support Advocacy Week. And then finally, we have Sal, who is our Advocacy Week coordinator, and he is the main point of contact for you this year. So if you're reaching out to our advocacy at solvecfs.org inbox, Sal will probably be the one sending you a response. So welcome, Sal. Great to have you here too. And I'm seeing a lot of people from all over the country introducing themselves in the chat right now. It is so great to have you all here. All right. So with that, I am actually going to hand over to Sal to kind of talk us through today's agenda.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so very glad you could join us. So first up, as far as today goes, while everyone's sharing where they're calling in from, here's what we're going to cover just ahead of today. So we're going to start by going over why, just from storytelling to policy. Essentially, we know we're going to Congress to share our stories with Congress members or congressional staff. So we're just going to do a little bit of review. I'm going to go ahead and get started and go over our five-step story structure. From there, we're going to kick it off over to our team to where they're going to go over a sort of four-step process to drill in and talk specifics on policy. That's choosing a specific policy focus, understanding the policy's purpose, identifying the impact that that policy may have either on you personally or someone you know, the greater community, and ultimately how you can refine that information into that storytelling process that we're about to go over. From there, we're just going to review and recap some of the resources and support that we have, and just to make sure that everybody's ready and set to go ahead of our meetings. Then finally close out with some questions. So from here, let's go ahead and go over storytelling to policy. So quite a bit of text on this screen. Let's go ahead and read it just like we would page from a book, left hand to right hand side, and I promise you it'll all make sense. So for those of you that may not have joined our storytelling training last week, no worries. We're going to have a recording of that posted very soon that we're going to share out with folks. But just as a little mini recap, what we're using and asking folks to use to make sure that the stories that we share at Congress are not only powerful, personal, resonant, but that they're effective, that they're speaking directly to the things that congressional staffers that make their ears perk up, that resonate with the issues. And when we tell them all cohesively in this way as a whole, they're going to be powerful, not just individually, but collectively. So as a recap, on that left-hand side, you see 5 steps: introduce yourself, personal challenge, value statement, policy position, and then the educate or support ask. Now, it might seem simple, might seem all over the place, but really what this is this very simple and yet effective framework that comes from Marshall Gans, esteemed organizer Marshall Gans's framework for telling personal stories. So on the right-hand side, let's break it down with this example. Um, hey, my name is Leo. I'm a father of two from PA 03. This is the introduction. It's very simple. It's just sharing your name, maybe a little bit of color. It could be like what you do for work, but here Leo's talking about how he's a father of two and the congressional district that he's from. Then you see the actual story that we might think, and this is what I mean by personal challenge. Leo says, I've had ME CFS for over 8 years. I used to work full time and coach soccer, but now even walking to the kitchen can leave me bedridden. I applied for disability benefits, but it took 3 years and multiple appeals. Value statement that we're speaking to is just tying not just this challenge that you've been going through in this like big, real, three-dimensional, continually lived way, but speaking to the moral reason behind why everybody should care about this, whether it's at Congress or otherwise. So here, very simple. People with chronic illnesses deserve fair access to support systems. Nice and simple, something we can all agree in. Step 4 is going to be what the main of today goes over. But here, very simply, you'll see Leo saying that's why it's essential to protect and expand CDC programs like the multi-site clinical assessment of ME/CFS or MCAM, which help define and validate this condition. He ends with his ask, please support the expansion of MCAM so we can build a more accurate picture of what ME/CFS looks like and how it affects families like mine. As you can see, boom, boom, done, done. That story is not very long, and yet it's powerful. It's very personal, and it speaks to the whole of a human being. And yet at the same time, it's effective and says everything that a congressional staffer would need to hear about a specific program in such a way that you could share, that they can take notes, share it down, and be moved to support the cause that we're asking for. So this is why we're gonna, yeah, perfect. So moving from storytelling specifically to policy. So we know stories are powerful and Congress is policy focused. So we want to address both elements in today's training as part of the intermediate level of advocacy work. Because see, staffers were very like the staffers at Congress are trained to listen specifically for constituent needs tied to legislation. I can speak to this from my own experiences. In the past, congressional staffers are always listening and they're always responsive in terms of like what they actually want to hear. But there are generally like issues or bills. If it's speaking to an actual real concrete policy, they perk up, they count the number of stories, they count the number of constituents who are reaching out about that issue specifically. So tying your story to a specific policy or a specific program that's in place or that's being debated is going to lead to a greater outcome. And of course, impact increases when we all do this together. I mean it when I say that they count for these things. If multiple staffers are coming in and they're all coming in with the same, or sorry, if multiple advocates are coming in and sharing and speaking to the same policies, the same programs in the same way, then they pay attention. They start counting, and even staffers from different offices start talking to each other. So on this note, we can talk over the 4-step framework, and I'm going to go ahead and for this, just explain this one last piece before I kick this off. So last week's beginner level Zoom training went very much in detail over the power of effective storytelling, telling our stories and shaping them according to that GAN structure that we just kind of whipped through just right quick. We have a different, smaller 4-step framework for understanding policy because these programs are from all over the place and different offices, different departments, different staffers. It can be a lot to sort of drill into, but I can't emphasize enough that with the simple 4 steps, choose a policy focus, just one, describe the ask, identify the personal or a community impact, and then refine your story. Taking those 4 steps lets your personal story go from being one that's resonant to one that's highly impactful. So on this note, we're about to go over and drill down into this specifically. And for this, I would love to hand it off over to Emily Taylor. Emily, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and names in the chat, so it's great to see you all and some new ones. So welcome to our new folks as well. I'm going to be going over the 4 areas of policy that we've identified for our Advocacy Week this year. And remember, you're only going to choose one of these. So you kind of want to feel what resonates with you. And these 4 areas are also going to be further pulled apart in our advanced training for those who want to step up their advocacy to the even next level. So today we're going to be talking about specifically what are good about these policies and why do we want them to continue to exist. So this is a little bit of defense around the serious cut conversations that are taking place on the Hill right now. And we are advocating for the continuance of these programs and illustrating why they're successful. So these 4 areas are restore the CDMRP funding, which CDMRP stands for Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. From those of you who have been in previously Advocacy Weeks, you may be familiar with this program, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But this one is in the Department of Defense. Really interesting program. The second element, or the second option, is the Save the CDC Chronic Fatigue Syndrome program. In the massive budget and the massive document that composes the US budget, there is only one specific program for chronic fatigue syndrome and ME/CFS, and that is at the CDC. And so that program is one of the most vulnerable of our programs because it has that line item status, and also one of the most effective of our programs because it has that line item status. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail as well. The third is the Fund the NIH ME/CFS Roadmap. This is a really exceptional success story about the NIH doing something well and good and executing on a strategic plan to basically write a step-by-step path to clinical trials for ME/CFS with experts from the community at the table as equal partners. And so that is a really great success story as well. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. And lastly, but not least, the 10-year follow-up on the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report. For those of you who have been in this world for more than a decade, you may remember this as the IOM report. So it's been 10 years, can you imagine? And so we want that report to continue to be successful and another iteration to come forward. So those are the 4 areas, and we're going to dive into a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start in the same order I just went with. We're going to dive into the CDMRP. So for those of you who have a family or background or experience in the military branches or are a veteran, this is one that is exceptionally good for you to talk about because it has that focus on our men and women and people in service uniforms. So this is called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, the CDMRP. That is within that program. There's quite a few programs within that program, so that's kind of the umbrella term. Within that program, we are especially interested in the PRMRP, which is the Peer-Reviewed Medical Research Program. The reason why this matters is because I like to describe it, and when I first entered the field, this was the analogy used to describe it to me, is that the NIH, as we understand it, its role in scientific investment is a little bit like your regular community police department. They handle your everyday, run-of-the-mill kind of routine science and exploration. However, the CDMRP is like the SWAT team. They come in high impact, high rewards, higher numbers, higher risk, but and then they get out again. And so one of the really interesting things about the CDMRP as a program and what it does is it funds research grants, but research grants that are specifically focused on the impact of military readiness and men and women and veterans and their families. So that's why that's the subset of this. But what's really interesting about the way this program operates is that it renews every year. And every year it is refreshed. And every year a new, what they call consumer review board, which is made up of patients like you, comes to look at the proposals and give the CDMRP program officers advice on what they need to target. So every year it's refreshed. Every year it's updated. And every year it looks at two metrics. Not only scientific validity, obviously scientific standard is very high, but second, will it address the needs of the field and push the field significantly forward? And that second metric is why ME/CFS has done so well in this program, and long COVID and other infection-associated chronic illnesses as well. We have been so successful in this program because ME/CFS is a field that is desperate for those pushes forward. And the funding that has come from this, as an example of success, BioV's $13 million Bezitrim trial is specifically exploring metabolic pathways and metabolism pathways in ME/CFS patients. And it's really pushing the field forward. So this program is really innovative and really highly recommended in terms of a successful story. And now for the current status. The CDMRP program was cut by 57% in the continuing resolution that was passed. We are part of a coalition called the DHRC. It stands for Defense Health Research Consortium. And we've been working hard to advocate to restore this funding, including a Dear Colleague letter. So for folks who want to select this area of policy focus, you can talk to the uniqueness of the program. One thing I like to highlight is how successful it's been in really innovating in the field. And how it is a little bit higher risk than the NIH, but higher reward, and how it has that different approach. So that's the CDMRP. I'll just pause there, and I welcome if there's any particular questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next policy area. And I know we didn't plan for questions, but I wanted to highlight if there's anything that was confusing. How much was specifically cut from the PMRP? That's a great question, Christina. Yes, the PMRP was reduced significantly. In previous years, it was $370 million, and I'll need to double check this figure, but I believe it was cut to about $180 million. So that's less money that's available, but I'll confirm that figure and send that out for folks if you would like to use that. Excellent. Well, thank you for that question. Seeing no additional questions in the chat, I'll move on to our second policy item. This is the Save the CDC's Chronic Fatigue Syndrome program. And for those of you who are, like me, cringing a little bit at the continued use of chronic fatigue syndrome program, please keep in mind that this was created in 1991 when we were not as enlightened about using appropriate terms and not harmful terms for disease space. So it is still called the Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Program, even though the program itself uses the term ME/CFS. Again, why it matters. This is the only federal program, the only line item in the whole federal government that is specifically focused on ME/CFS, and it focuses on health education, surveillance, and clinical tools. This has also been the home of, as you saw in our wonderful example that Sal shared, of the MCAM program, the multi-site clinical assessment of ME/CFS program, which has had some really interesting publications. And for those of you who are critical of this program, I understand it's been slower than we would have liked, but when it has delivered strong science that has confirmed or moved the field forward. So this is something we want to defend and continue its existence. Its current status is unknown. There are Senate meetings with a deadline of July 4th for the budget to pass. So we are coming in at exactly the right time to really make a last-ditch effort to save this program. And we want congressional offices to ensure that it is not cut out of the budget. In fact, if our senators and members of Congress would go so far, we'd even ask them to increase the funding to $10 million in FY27. And one of the things that you can point out about that increase of $10 million, because it's currently funded at 5.4, is that we haven't had an increase since its inception in the early 90s. So if you adjust for inflation, we would be at roughly $10 million in today's spending power. So that is important to note, that it's not really an increase to expand the program's efforts, but rather an increase to adjust for inflation and ensure that its spending power remains what it was originally intended by Congress. So on the House side, while the budget has already passed on the House side, and the report has not yet come out, so we can't tell if this program is specifically funding. Again, we are asking our members of Congress on the House side that if they can continue to work with their Senate colleagues in their role of advisory folks on the budget to protect this program in both this year and the years beyond. I'll just pause there, and again, welcome questions in the chat, which I see there are a couple. Yes, thank you pointing out. Yes, one area of success that I didn't mention that is important to mention about the CDC's work is they were very successful in launching a medical education program around school nurses, and educated and provided exceptional materials out to the school nursing community about students who may have ME/CFS or post-viral chronic condition or illness in a school setting. So that was another program, a great example of the CDC doing some exceptional work. And I'll also flag that the only reason we even understand how many people in the United States have chronic fatigue syndrome is thanks to the CDC data. They also did the long COVID data and were able to include those questions in the household pulse study. So they are critical for understanding not just some great work about medical education and research, but also some very important work about prevalence and surveillance that I think is often goes unrecognized. And I just want to do a shout out to ME Action Georgia, who I know have done some really great collaborations with CDC. And thank you, Corey, for mentioning that, because that is a really important flag to share with our allies across the space as well. So with that, I'll pause there. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so we'll move on to the next policy focus. For those who are interested in choosing one policy to focus on regarding the NIH. Can we get, there we go, perfect. So the NIH ME/CFS roadmap, as I described before, is a project that I've had other folks from other disease spaces call me and say, how did the ME/CFS community get this, and how can we do it too? It is one of the, I'd say, most aspirational projects I've seen come out of the NIH, and it's up to us now to make sure it takes the next step forward. So if for those of you who are not familiar with the NIH ME/CFS roadmap, I believe there are some links that we can share to learn a little bit more about it. And if you'd like to explore it on your own, please do. But it is a long overdue initiative to coordinate, expand, and guide federal research into ME/CFS. It is exactly as its name implies, a roadmap to specifically clinical trials. Why does this matter? Well, as we know, there are no FDA-approved treatments, no biomarkers, and an often ineffective diagnosis process for people with ME/CFS. Especially with clinicians who are poorly educated about ME/CFS, that diagnosis journey becomes even more difficult. This roadmap can transform the research landscape, but it needs fuel, which is funding, to make it across the finish line. So the NIH has been an excellent partner in developing the roadmap, but ultimately, as our system works, the money, the powers of the purse strings go to Congress, and Congress has not committed or dedicated any funding at this time to implement the roadmap. The ME/CFS community has had an appropriations letter, and again, kudos to our friends at Not Just Fatigue and ME Action, who have been working very hard on that area of work, circulating this to Congress. Some of you may have signed their open letter on this topic, and they're asking for 50 million in this upcoming fiscal year to implement the roadmap's recommendations, including advancing biomarker discovery, diagnostic tool development, and of course, clinical trials. So I'll just wrap up by saying this project is decades in the making, and it feels like such a great precipice to be at. And yet you look further down the mountain range after making this big climb, and you can see there are even bigger mountains in our future with this project. But this is a fantastic place to be, because you can also turn back and see how far we've come through the mountain range and realize that this is an excellent real moment to celebrate. So if we can share that celebration with our members of Congress to let them understand how important it could be to make this a reality. I'll pause there again, and I'll invite any comments or questions in the chat. Could we lose this funding? Interesting. Thank you for that question. Actually, it is not yet funded, so no, we can't yet lose it because it's not funded at this time. I would love to have the fight where we're ensuring that the funding is not withdrawn, but first we have to get it funded initially. So great question. And it seems the current environment, a lot of policymakers want to avoid finding biomarkers. Interesting comment, Brian. I will say, in my experience, biomarkers and details around them are a level of nuance that most policymakers, unless they have a specific focus in research, are not pretty nuanced about. So I don't think they understand that, like, they work with that term on a regular basis, but they do understand the purpose of different levels of research. And so I think that's where your stories can be most impactful, to make that connection about, I'm a person in your district and this makes my health outcomes better, which means our economy does better, which means that we as a whole in our district do better. So that's a great way to make that connection. Okay, so I will, I'm seeing a couple other questions. I will get to those at the end, but great questions, keep them coming. I'm gonna move on to our very last one, because I don't want to take up more than time than I have already. I think I'm a little over, but I want to give each attention to each policy so that you all can make your choices with the best information about which policy you want to advocate for. All right, last policy. Fund a 10-year follow-up to the 2015 IOM National Academies of Science and Medicine, Engineering and Medicine, NASEM MECFS report. Ooh, that's a mouthful. In short, what this is a policy approach of let's do it again. And by let's do it again, I mean, let's have another IOM report. And for those of you who have been in the field, again, so more than 10 years, you will remember, and I definitely remember, that there was a time before the IOM report, and then there was the time after the IOM report. It made such a landmark difference in our disease recognition, validity, respect. It really was, I'd say, of the top 5 events in this disease space, it would be on that list. It was so powerful. And yet, here we are 10 years later, and it feels that we're having the same battles, right? Some of these things have not changed, and that is very frustrating. One of the recommendations of the Institute of Medicine, now called NASEM report, which was called Beyond Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, Redefining an Illness. One of the real benchmarks of this report is that it articulated and consolidated all of the validated research in the field, and then published it from a government source, and came to the specific and wholehearted screaming conclusion that ME/CFS is a real pathobiological disease and is not a mental health issue. And that, coming from a government authority, really shifted a lot of the conversation. It changed our entire advocacy approach. We didn't have to prove we existed anymore. It was no longer do we exist, it was now how do we fix this? And that was a huge defining moment. So why it matters. One of the recommendations of the report, it made several, but one of the recommendations was that this report needs to be redone in 10 years because the field is moving so quickly. And little did they know, with COVID on the horizon, that the field would move even quicker than they could have even anticipated 10 years ago. And so it is absolutely a critical time for the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to do exactly what it did in 2015. Take the best researchers, clinically validated experts, bring them all together, and take the time to publish the definitive work on what we know about this disease to date. And that coming from a government source to validate all of that information will, I think, propel us even further. So I'll pause here again and invite some questions in the chat. And I think I'm 3 minutes over, but hopefully I still have time to share any questions that folks might have on this last policy area. Oh my goodness, so many questions. Okay. Are there any parts of the report that stand out that we really want updated? Thank you. That's a great question. I think the prevalence numbers from the report, those are still cited today. And I think those are an area that would be exceptionally valid and helpful for enumerating the sheer growth of this population. I think especially with the undeniable scientific link with post-COVID conditions and syndromes and long COVID, that element and the science we've learned from that connection needs to be validated from a government source. That would be amazing. I think the last piece of the report that I would really emphasize is the treatment potential now. We know and have so many different tools in our toolkit for helping treat patients that if a government validated source could publish a summary of this is how patients need to receive care, I think that would be a significant tool in improving the quality of care that patients are currently receiving from their medical providers. So I think and not even to mention that as a medical education tool for the next generation of doctors, it would be incredibly powerful. So thank you. That was some great questions there. All right. I know we have one additional area to talk about before we get to the full Q&A. So with that, I'll pass it back over to the rest of the team. And then I look forward to your questions at the end. Thank you so much.
All right. So jumping back in, and I know there are still questions in the chat, which Emily's going to be reviewing, and we'll be able to have a little more time to answer questions towards the end of this call. So Sal and I are actually going to go ahead and model what this storytelling model might look like. It's too many models in one sentence, but you get the idea. We're going to just kind of play this out. So I'm going to actually go forward here, and we're just going to kind of talk through. Oh, hang on. Here we go. All right. So Sal, would you like to go ahead and actually practice doing one story?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to be speaking to funding research on funding CDMRP research. I'm Marisol, a former nurse in this story scenario, so going right ahead. Hi, I'm Marisol, a former nurse now living with ME CFS in Texas. After my illness began, I lost my ability to work, drive, and participate in family life and in my life generally. And there's no treatments approved specifically for ME CFS right now. We deserve investment in research that matches the scale of our need. So that's why I'm urging Congress to restore funding to the congressionally directed medical research program, which supports ME, CFS, long COVID research. And I'm asking, please support legislation to reverse CDMRP funding cuts and increase investment in fiscal year 2026. And just like that, yeah, that story had all 5 elements and spoke directly to the policy that we had covered. Monique, would you like to share another one?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to be Rachel from Michigan. Hi there. My name is Rachel and I'm from Michigan. I developed ME/CFS after a viral infection. The hardest part has been not being believed. I saw over a dozen doctors before getting a diagnosis. Everyone deserves timely care and a chance to be heard. That's why we urgently need to fund a follow-up report from the National Academies of Science and Medicine on MECFS. Please support $5 million in funding for this NASM report to improve recognition and care for patients like me. So those are just a couple of examples of how you might approach your story and just having them in a really compact, straightforward process. You introduce yourself, describe your personal challenge, explain the value statement that connects it to the bigger community, explain our policy position. What are we fighting for? And then you just ask them what we want them to do. What are we asking for them to do as a member of Congress? All right, so moving forward, let's actually just do a really quick overview of what to expect at meetings. For those who were on the beginner training last week, you will already have gone through this. And I know some of you also have already done this in the past, but I also know that there may be some people on this call today who are like, I both want to do policy and also I have not yet had a chance to attend the beginner training. So I'm going to do a brief overview of what you're going to be walking into during Advocacy Week. So when you walk into a congressional office, the meetings can move quickly and the format can shift. What always stays the same is your voice, your story, and your purpose. Congress is always busy. You're meeting with offices during a time of rapid political movement and competing priorities. Sometimes meetings are going to get shortened, moved, or rescheduled. That is not a reflection on you or your message. And especially with their budget deadline being July 4th, just know that the Senate meetings in particular for that may get disrupted a bit, in particular because they may call for a vote at any time. And when there's a vote called, you just see everyone start like running and they're having to reschedule everything. So just know that may happen. We do our best to keep you updated in real time as things happen. If your meetings get changed, it will show up in your schedule right away. So you'll be able to see that, but just know it's not a reflection of you or how much they value hearing from you. These meetings are worth showing up for, even if the staffer only has 5 minutes and then has to run. So just know that even one person sharing their story before the staffer has to go can make an impact. You may not meet with the actual member of Congress. That's okay, and often actually better. The reason for this is the staffers are the ones who are the experts in the issues that we're talking about. So a lot of times we'll meet with a health policy staffer. So this may be someone who has a really good grounding in the details of how government health policy works and is actually really able to engage with you more than the member of Congress themselves might be able to on the details of how this can move forward and how they can help our communities. And these staffers are the ones who then take policy proposals to their member of Congress and say, hey, we're hearing from constituents that this is really important. So you should take a look at this. So we want to treat the meeting with the same care and professionalism, no matter who's in the room. This is a real opportunity, and staffers are essential to the policymaking process. They prepare briefings, draft recommendations, and decide what reaches the members' attention. So Sal, I'm actually going to hand it over to you to walk through how to prep for meetings and how people can carry themselves during them. Let's see, will it let you unmute?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, everyone. So as far as preparing and prep and participation for these meetings, there's just a brief section that's going to walk through how to prepare before your meetings and how to carry yourself during them. Because the goal is to make sure that you feel confident and equipped to show up, that you know to speak clearly, but also that you're going to be heard. So moving to the next slide, nice and simple, how to prepare ahead of time. You've got plenty of time leading up to the meeting. It's nice and simple, 3 steps. Stick to your schedule. Remember that no call, no shows reflect poorly on the whole team. And please don't reschedule meetings yourself. So just remember, stick to your schedule. Offices take note of which advocates show up on time and which don't. And reliability matters when it comes to no calls, no shows. If you miss a meeting or cancel without notice, it might affect our ability to meet with that office again next year. And yeah, when it comes down to rescheduling meetings, please don't ever do that directly or don't reach out to them directly to do so. Please let our scheduling team handle this. Just remember, we're building long-term relationships here. Every congressional staffer Every Congress member may be there for the long haul. And this is how we build out the relationships that are going to get even more impactful as our advocacy years go on. So that's how to prepare. As far as how to participate, that is how to be during the actual meeting itself. We just say, please follow the 3 Bs and be nice. The 3 Bs, of course, are be brief, be brilliant, be done. And of course, these are not just meetings, they're relationship building opportunities. And we are building long-term relationships. So let's go over each of these just a little bit more in detail. First, be brief. Meetings are often 15 to 30 minutes tops. You may be the first person with ME, CFS, any condition that a staffer has ever met. So you're going to leave an impression, but just remember, stick to one story, one value, one ask. It's going to be important to just be clear. And as such, leave room for discussion. You want them asking questions. You want them to share their interest, and you want to make sure that there's plenty of time to make the ask as well. But don't just be brief. Be brilliant. Yeah, and by brilliant, we just mean stay on message, share your story early and clearly, and speak plainly from the heart. What we mean by this is, yeah, you do not need to sound like an expert in terms of staying on message. All you need to do is to speak clearly about what you know, which is your life. We could spend years researching this or that doc, but you're still ultimately going to be the expert of one thing nobody else can beat. That is knowing your experience and why you're there in that moment. You want to share your story early and clearly. Just start the meeting strong, introduce yourself, and go right into the story. I just think it doesn't take very long to tell stories using that 5-step structure, but they're powerful and they listen. And that opens up the rest of that brief meeting to make sure that action can be taken, that questions are asked. And by speak plainly and from the heart, really, it just means speak sincerely, speak authentically. Let your values, your own reality shine through. This is the stuff that staff remembers. Finally, be done. Know when to stop. Once you've shared your story and your ask, pause. Let that silence hang. That's when people really let things stick in the heart, and when they actually do follow up and ask impactful questions, when they're human beings. So yeah, avoid unnecessary detail. Remember, if you keep talking, you risk losing their attention. Just let the words settle. A few strong points, a concise, good story with plenty of gaps and space around it really helps draw people in and just be together in that moment. Finally, as far as leaving space, oh yeah, no, well, be nice as well. Yeah, stay respectful, even if the meeting's challenging. I know kindness matters. Y'all, staffers may not know much about this or that policy or this or that position. They might know a lot about the policy, but they may not know about the experience. It'll feel tempting to be frustrated because you're like, I'm here, this is my chance. But the truth is, in that moment, these are all people thinking they're doing their best to help other people out. You want to be patient with them. So if someone uses, for example, outdated language, you can gently say, actually, we prefer the term MECFS. Just presume or assume good intent and always stay calm and respectful. Even if the staffer seems distracted, this may be the start of a longer relationship. They're always running back and forth all day. They're impatient, but they're trying to pay attention. This is where you telling your story powerfully can actually really draw them back in and be present with you in that moment. So yeah, how you make them feel in the meetings can end up shaping how they remember you, how they remember us, how they remember and think about this condition going forward. I know y'all are going to do a great job. Everybody here is here at great personal cost in terms of time, in terms of attention, in terms of hope. Just the fact that you're here on this call is already speaking to the energy that I know each and every one of y'all are going to bring into that call. If we all keep this energy and bring that into these meetings, I know we're going to do great. So just to close out, just some simple do's and don'ts. And remember, this training will be recorded, so we'll be able to get this out soon on enough. It comes down to the simple things. Do be honest and authentic. Do make it personal. I mean, it's okay to share, express emotion. Um, do connect your experiences though to the asks that you're making. It can be a little easy to think like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to share my story and that's enough. But like, no, let's tie it back. I'm here because I want to make sure each and every one of y'all's stories can actually impact, land, and get the help that we need. That's an example. Do repeat the asks. And of course, there are some don'ts. Please don't be negative, just the facts. Don't make accusations or assumptions. Don't get distracted or connect to unrelated topics. And don't counter or disagree with other advocates. We're all here as a team. We're all going to do great. And yeah, very happy that each and every one of y'all are here. So on this note, I believe I can hand this back over to Monique to talk over resources and support.
Absolutely. Okay. And I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat too. And I'm also seeing some great responses from other advocates. So feel free to keep adding your own thoughts and responses to those questions, because some of you have some really, really incredible experience to share. And I love seeing that. So I want to just talk through the toolkit. I am going to see, Sal, can you go ahead and drop the link to the toolkit in the chat for everyone? This toolkit will actually have your talking points in it in more detail. It includes your information about just the overall schedule for Advocacy Week. So what's happening each day, how to access those activities. It also has step-by-step instructions on how to use the portal. Including, here is how you log in, here's how you see your schedule, here is how you join your meeting, all of those pieces. And it also has some additional resources like just some basic MECFS fact sheets that you can use to kind of refer to and know, here's some basic facts if you need to share them. Though a lot of these pieces will also be sent to the members of Congress ahead of time. So just know that. I'm also going to go ahead and stop screen sharing for a minute now. And let me just pull up here. All right, let's see. So just also know we're going to be recording just a quick walkthrough of the portal for you all. That is also going to be sent out to you all shortly. So over the next week or so, we'll get that over to you. And that's just going to kind of walk you through each step. It was also covered in the beginner's training. So that will also be uploaded by the end of the week for you and sent out to you all. With that, I actually want to just kind of pause and I want to make sure that we have some time to take your questions. So Emily, I know you've been keeping an eye on the chat. Are there any questions you're seeing that we should go ahead and actually address out loud for everyone?
Very interesting comments in the chat. I want to highlight one of the interesting comments that came from Mark regarding a recommendation to join a local Democrat or Republican club in your area to increase your visibility with your member. This is subject to your own interest, energy, and availability. With some of those local clubs, it can be a world unto itself. So with that in mind, I would say that's a really cool mechanism to get involved with politics. Recognize it's party politics, which is a whole separate world. But it could be a valuable strategy to really emphasize and get that extra in with your member. And again, emphasizing, I think that's a really good point to emphasize that this is long-term relationship building. We have our biggest success with folks that we've stayed with a long time. If you think about some of our biggest champions on Capitol Hill right now, we have, Senator Markey, who's been around with us for years, Representative Eshoo, who's been a champion for years. So these are folks that have that are touched and motivated on this issue. And what we're trying to develop, and I like to describe it this way, is we're really looking for a member that will lie down on the tracks for our disease, right? We're looking for someone who is willing to fight to the mat for us. And that is not someone you get in a 20-minute conversation, right? You don't develop that kind of friendship that quickly, and the same way you don't develop that kind of political relationship that quickly. So really keep in mind that these are long-term relationships, and especially with the staffers, it's amazing how they all circle back and come back around. So never think that the staffer is a waste of time. The staffers move mountains, and they are sometimes our biggest allies, and have developed new champions because a staffer from another office joined a different office, and now that office is educated. So it really is a bit of a relationship building maze that we pull all these together, and then we have a larger whole. So yeah, that's just one comment. Any other comments in the chat that we want to focus on, or anyone want to raise their hand and share a comment? I'll just jump in with another theme I'm seeing from the conversation in the chat, which I think is a really good one, is the challenge of brain fog and cognitive dysfunction with this, and that is really hard. And I will say with my experience, I had the wonderful experience of taking my mother to Advocacy Day one year in person, and when we were prepping her story and doing her work, we tried to make it a bit of a fun game, and we talked about, and we used it as a way to talk about sort of our experiences and how we felt about, what really did change in our lives. So it was really cathartic in that experience. But one takeaway I would add is what one thing we did that was very helpful is we recorded the storytelling before, and then we took notes from our own story. So we that was one method that we used. And so this takes, I'd say, like a medium level of spoons. If you have just a phone, or an iPad, or even you could even go with a friend with a Zoom call. And so you practice your story, and you do it first time raw, right? Do it the ugly cry version. Do whatever you need to, as long as you need, and then play it back and say, like, oh, that felt good, or that looked weird, or and then just make notes to yourself, like, let's focus on this. And then with those basic notes, that was enough, for at least with my mom's experience, to tell her story very authentically. And she has a lot of what's the technical term is aphasia, but that the word loss, that symptom, that's one that she really struggles with. So writing down the words that she was having trouble pulling in the moment was really helpful, just to have that in front of her, because as you know, that sometimes when you're thinking, oh, that thing, and it's right at the tip of your tongue, and that seems so exacerbated, especially when you're nervous. So I hope that is helpful. Monique, or Sal, any other suggestions about tips and tricks for brain fog management while advocating?
I think just knowing that just your presence itself can be enough to make an impact. If you need to show up and just say, I'm too sick to participate today, but I'm here in support of the team, that's okay. That's enough. And sometimes just letting them know how bad this illness can get actually in and of itself makes that impact, right? So we've definitely had people who show up for meetings and like they're not able to get out of bed that day, and they're there in bed, and just letting them know, like, hey, this is part of how it is having this illness. I literally cannot get out of bed. So that is an option. Sometimes letting your team know at the beginning, like, hey, I'm not able to participate, or I may want to just put my story in the chat, and typing your story and putting it in the chat, just so that can be either read by one of your team members, or just so that the member of Congress or their staffer can see it, can be a really good option as well. So just know that, like, if you're in a severe flare right now, if you're in, if you have severe or very severe ME and you still want to participate, there are absolutely ways that you can do that, and, just show up however you are that day.
Yeah. And I would just really emphasize that point of yours, Monique, because that's one of the most fundamentally important things in communication, that what we often think are limitations can be our greatest strengths when it comes to effective communication. I'm seeing excellent examples in the chat, tips that people themselves are sharing. I think I just saw one from, oh, let me just make sure I didn't lose track of that one. Yeah. Christina shares saying, brain fog. I use 3 to 4 note cards every year with ME notes on it. That's fantastic. Normally, we might be thinking presenting to Congress, we should have our points memorized, our stories completely done. We should be polished up and stuff. But really, these are just aids that we're using. This is something that you might have to use or want to use or need to use, and that's something that can be effective for your storytelling. So that's a great tip. I think there might be a few others, but yeah, that's the main thing I've got.
Oh, some other great questions in the chat are coming up. One question specifically, does everyone on the team need to be on the same ask? No, great question. Pick the ask that you resonate with, that really feels that that you tie to your story most strongly. Whether it's research, whether it's medical education, whichever piece of that, those policy areas that we shared. And it's okay if people pick different policy areas. I think that's a staffer can handle more than 2 notes. And they are very accustomed to that. And again, they will be receiving materials from Solve both before and after the meeting that will have that information in it as well. They'll have their take homes. And what's going to be most powerful, and I think this reflecting on when I was a staffer, the take homes. I'll be half the time, sometimes they end up in the round file, right? Because there's just so many things shifting, and sometimes they're not always there. But when I had that connection with somebody, like when that hit my heartstrings, and it made me look at that paper twice, like, oh right, that meeting, those folks, and let me look at this more closely. And so that's the trigger moment you're going for. And then one other thing that came up in the chat earlier that I wanted to flag, and apologies, I'm jumping around, but I wanted to flag, and this has been a surprisingly common experience for both myself and other advocates, that you will occasionally encounter a moment where you'll be speaking with a staffer and describing the disease, and the staffer will say, oh my goodness, that's me, or my brother, or my sister, or my cousin, or my partner, or somebody. And then all of a sudden, your meeting that was supposed to be about the needs of our community is now about providing medical care to their loved one. And this is a hard line to walk, folks. So if you find yourself in this circumstance, and thank you to who pointed this out, it's not uncommon. The way I handle it is acknowledge the connection, reconnect it to the policy that you're asking, and emphasize how that would help their loved one in that circumstance. So for example, this is a real story. I was in a staff meeting with a member of Congress's health staffer, and we had that moment where I was describing my mother's onset, and they said, oh, wow, I have a family member that something similar than that happened to, and they've never been the same since. And so I said, oh, well, tell me more. What was their experience? And so they talked a little bit about some of the symptoms they had and what happened. I was like, actually, that sounds like post-exertional malaise. Let me tell you what post-exertional malaise is. It's actually potentially treatable with pacing. And so I turned it back into, but this is medical education that your loved one might never receive because doctors are not taught this. So I'm happy to provide you more materials about how we can educate doctors to help take care of people like your loved one. So that was how I turned it back around in that situation. But this is surprisingly common. So just be, I guess, I wanted to prepare you all in case you did end up in that circumstance.
Okay, and then of course, just the quick questions we're getting about connecting with other advocates. There was a button on the registration form to allow you to opt in to Solve being able to share your information with other advocates. So for those who did opt in, we're going to be just connecting you with other members in your state over email. If you don't know if you opted in, feel free to email us at advocacy@solvecfs.org, which I'm dropping in the chat, just to let us know that you're okay with that. The one caveat I will say is that your meetings, because there are so many members of Congress, aren't necessarily going to be just with people from your state. And you may have different members of the team and people from different states joining you in different meetings. So we can connect you with just kind of who generally is from your state and may show up in most of your meetings. But that's more just as a chance to kind of connect with other advocates. The other piece is that your meetings will open, I believe this year it's 10 minutes. The Zoom call will open 10 minutes before the specific meeting begins. That's really going to be when you want to make sure that everyone arrives 10 minutes early so you can connect with your team, divvy up who's going to go first. Your team lead will kind of just walk you through, here's who's going to talk about this, then you're going to talk about this, or you can just let them know where your energy level is at that day. So that's really where you will connect with the specific team for that meeting and decide on your agenda. And then always feel free to email us at advocacy@solvecfs.org with additional questions. And then Mary, I also see one last question. So we're not going to be meeting with our own representatives or senators / staff. That's a great question. In general, that is the goal. And so most senators and representatives prefer it when there's at least one constituent from their state or district on each call. But sometimes to ensure you have backup, we will have people from other states join you for additional meetings. So that may mean you'll kind of be able to participate in a few more meetings. The other thing is some senators and some members of Congress just aren't available. So like not all states are as receptive as others. And so some meetings, some states, the senators are going to be like, no, I don't want to meet. So we just kind of balance all of that. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to be super respectful to your time and the spoons that you've taken to join us. This has been recorded, so we will get this uploaded along with the beginner training here shortly, and make sure that we get those links to you. And then feel free to email us always if you have questions. So appreciative to each and every one of you. And I look forward to speaking with you soon.